Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. Now, Darren Neely is a military researcher and author. He has written a book, A Pictorial History of the 3rd Armored Division. So we look forward to seeing lots of great photos of tanks and tankers in the ETO in a show that may well eclipse others we have done on the 3rd Armored. Did you see what I did there, folks? Do you see what I did there? Nice topical gag. I'll bring Darren in. Good afternoon, sir. How are you today?
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. Before we bring up your slide, we were just talking about what's been happening in the sort of 20 or 30 years of photo archives. And we've gone in our generation from grainy photos in paperback books to increasingly higher resolution photos available online. And therefore, that much more information we can glean from them. And I guess that's the kind of the journey you've been following these last few years. And it really has been amazing how tech has improved things.
Oh, absolutely. With the, as you mentioned, with the technology and scanners and the access at the archives, the ability to scan a photo and see the registration number on the tank, or if before the sensor marked out the tank markings or the patch on the uniform, you can Photoshop that out and you can positively identify the uniform, the tank number. And I'll show a couple slides here where, based on that tank number, we've been able to identify the tank crew, verify who died in that tank, unfortunately, and kind of actually help out some family members, that the grandsons that wanted to know what their grandfather did in the war. And like, well, here he is in his tank, a couple of days before he unfortunately was killed. So it's been fabulous.
Yeah, and you combine that with things like Google Earth and Street View and things like that, where you can go, oh, hey, there's the same bridge, there's the same building. It's extraordinary what we can do now. But we will bring up your slides. So, folks, this is going to be a kind of a photographic journey, lots of great images. And as you've got the idea from Darren, is going to kind of give us some idea about the stories behind them, what can be learned. And there is his book there. The links to purchase the book are in the description below, of course. I'm going to hand over to Darren, take us through this. So 3rd Armored Division, over to you, sir.
Okay. Well, just briefly, and the cover of the book here is actually one of the slides we'll talk about. As I mentioned, this tank, has a couple numbers on it you can see just from the cover, but then when we do the slide, you'll see some more interesting things, and we were able to dig really deep on this tank and, what happened to its crew, unfortunately. But just briefly, the way I kind of got interested in the photo research of these units was my grandfather was in the 30th Infantry. He joined his unit in January '45, and then I'm lucky that I live in Annapolis, Maryland, which is about 20 miles from College Park. And until about 10 years ago, they used to be open on evenings and on Saturdays. So I started going there to do my grandfather's research, and quickly you got it from the after action reports to the still photos room. And as I was telling Paul earlier, when you first get in there, the archivists help you. And one of the first books they have there, it's called The Havoc of War. And it's kind of like the stock Signal Corps photos that most of us probably saw in most of the World War II books we grew up with, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then, right away I was asked, I said, well, there's got to be more than this. Yes, there is. We have about 600,000 photos from World War II that the Signal Corps, Army Signal Corps took. This is just Army. I'm not talking about Navy and Marines and Air Force, of course. Right now, well, until about 5 years ago, they were all in these kind of like the library card catalog system. And you have to go through these card catalogs and look out. You have to search by subject. You can search by subject, location, units. But the key here is it all depends on how the person that looking at the photos for the archives, how they classified that. So a good example is, I know for a fact there's a photo of a German Panther tank in Belgium. It's not under tank. It's not under Belgium. It's not under German tanks. It's under civilians, because there's a bunch of civilians around the tank. So unless you're looking for photos of civilians, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard pressed to find that German Panther tank. Luckily now all those cards are scanned and digitized on the National Archives website. It's all OCR, so you can scan that information. So you can search for name, if you know the unit's name, the town, and then it'll tell you exactly what photo is. So if you have someone in the States, they can scan it for you, or you can order it from the archives. So in the course of that research of finding all these photos in the archives, I started kind of understanding how these units were put together, and then I started noticing gaps in the photos they would take, because they would classify them by numbers. I noticed gaps, and then I started finding photos that were not in the photo room, but they were downstairs in the textual room. like an after-action reports, reports, kind of like a lost photos, almost, if you will. So then that started getting me digging even more. So I started seeing photos on eBay. I'm like, okay, how are these photos getting on eBay? You know, if they're official single core photos. And then I just started making rosters of all the signal photographic men, and I started contacting their families, you know, surviving you know, sons and daughters or grandsons, granddaughters, etc. And luckily, I made contact with about 10 or 15 families across different photo companies that were across the ETO. And the reason I got to the 3rd Armored was because one of the families I met was the son of Sergeant Joe DeMarco, who was one of the still photo men attached to the 3rd Armored. About the same time, I discovered that his partner, his motion picture man, Leon Rosenman, his stuff was donated to a museum in New York. His film and all what he calls his dope sheets, which are literally the caption sheets of the film he made. And then I found their son of their commander, Lieutenant Noble. So I pretty much had the whole detachment in terms of like the family, you know, resources in terms of the photos that these men brought home, which is amazing that they were able to bring these photos home, but they were. Not just photos, but film reels, you know, captions and notes, etc. So that's kind of how I got into the 3rd Armored photos. And I'll show you just briefly how the photo team was made up, and then we can dig right into it. But the men of the Detachment K were attached to the 165th Signal Photographic Company, an Army Signal Corps unit. There were several in ETO, and they were typically attached at the Army level. So the 165th was usually with the 1st Army, 166th with the 3rd, 167th, 168th with the 9th, and the 163rd with the 7th. And then within the detachments, they were spread out across divisions. And then you would see the same name and caption. So you would start seeing, you know, say the name Smith, you'd see him a lot with, say, 7th Armored. So you can kind of put together how they were assembled. And then you dig into the morning reports, and you can see how the detachments were assigned to divisions. Many of these men had experience, even in Hollywood. After the war, some became even more famous. You know, Russ Meyer is a famous one, 166, and he went on to a illustrious career in B movies. Donald Ornitz, who was with the 4th Armored, did a lot of the Ardennes photos. He actually worked for Playboy after the war. I believe he was the one that photographed Marilyn Monroe. I'll have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And then, you know, after the war, a lot of these men continued in photo, or, you know, they just took up new skills and jobs. So Detachment K is who was attached to the 3rd Armored Division. So on February 8th, 1944, Detachment K was detached from the photo company and permanently assigned to the 3rd Armored Division. At the time, it was Lieutenant Thomas Noble was the commander. Sergeant Joseph DeMarco, I mentioned, he was the cameraman, and he was with the detachment until December 30th, and he did not return to the unit. Briefly, Sergeant Howard Burns was there, and then he left and joined a unit for D-Day, as you can see there. And then Leon Rosenman took his place in April. And then there was 2 other cameramen and motion picture men. There was Murray Root and then Chester Dahlmeyer, and they both left the unit in September. And then the next 3 are just with the drivers. Lawrence Hoffman, Travers Winters, and Vernon Smith. Early January, Detachment K and all the other detachments with the 165th were disbanded and went back to one big company level. But Rosenman and Noble continued with the 3rd Armored, along with many others from the 165th that you can see in their photo captions. Jim Bates is one of them. He's the one that took the famous, you know, motion picture of the tank tool at Cologne. And some other guys that I was able to get photos from as well. So just briefly, a couple photos of the men of the unit. This is Lieutenant Thomas Noble. You can see some, during the war ones, you know, pre-war one. The 3rd one in, where he's shaking the hand. He's actually shaking the hands with Leon Rosenman. He was promoted to lieutenant. That was late April 45. And then the one on the end there is Lieutenant Noble in the ruins of Cologne. You can recognize the church in the back. Here's Leon Rosenman. Interesting photo on the left is that's when he was after a lieutenant. He's shown his motion picture camera to some Russian soldiers there near the end of the war. And as you'll see, even though they were 165th signal men, you'll notice the patch on Rosenman's shoulder. So he was kind of like an honorary member of the Third Armored. He had the patch. He's in their yearbook at the end of the war. So even though he was 165th signal, he was technically part of the division. And then the photo on the right is him actually being interviewed, cameraman being interviewed by I think it was a UPI newsman there at the German border of Roken in September of 44. And then Joe DeMarco on the left, working on his camera. That was in England in 1943. And then Chester Dahlmeyer there was a motion picture guy. And then just two last photos real quick of the unit. So the guy on the left in front of the German anti-tank gun, that was in France, late 44. And that's one of the drivers, Travers Winters. You'll see this a lot with the Signal Corps men. When they did their photos, they would use each other as backdrops. So by the time they got to the action, a lot of the soldiers were gone. So they needed someone to pose. And that's the thing about Signal Corps photographs. A lot of them are posed. A lot of them are, a lot of them are not directly right in the front lines of combat. A lot of them were posed. So, they got their driver, gave him his Tommy gun, made him look really imposing there in front of the knocked out German anti-tank gun. And then on the right, this photo I just stumbled upon recently, just totally randomly. But the gentleman in the bomber jacket is Joe DeMarco. He's working with MPs on getting directions. As these photo guys were constantly following the Third Army units, he was getting some directions there in Normandy. I think that's July 27th, 44. So just want to show real quick about the captions. We mentioned about how the captions are cataloged, just so you kind of get an idea. I know the one on the left is a little vague. So the one on the left came from Joe DeMarco's family. And you can see it has that triangle stamp that says "not to be published," field press censor. It's a photo of some generals some colonels from the Third Armored near the end of August. And probably because they were named in it, Colonel Brown was named, and then CCB commander Colonel was named as well. So that's probably why they didn't pass it for because in the field, the generals were named, didn't want it out. So that one is not at the archives, I know for a fact. And then the one next to it is one that DeMarco took. It's a photo of some soldiers in front of a tank. And this is a good example. I know it's upside down, but what's circled there is the word resting. So this is a tank crew. It's a great shot. It's in front of an M4 tank right before Cobra started. And it's not under Third Armored. It's not under tank, but the category it's under is resting. So unless you're looking for troops resting, you're not going to find this. It's going to be tough to find this photo at the archives. And then I mentioned the dope sheets that Rosenman he has at the New York State Military Museum. So he called these dope sheets because that's what they were. Those were all the dope, all the information of the film he took. And he had donated all these to the archives there. And they're fascinating because they really tell you the exact story of what he did. It tells you the day, the time, how much film footage he took. And then you can tell it's more descriptive. This is about when the Third Armored was entering Roken in September 12th, 1944, the first town that the Third Armored crossed in Germany, the first unit to cross the border. He has the name of the recon troops that were in the jeeps. A nice little story there. The card on the right is what you get at the archives. So if you find, if you search, First Americans Germany, September 12th, 44, you get kind of some basic stuff there. You get troops of the 2nd Platoon, 33rd Armored Recon, 3rd Armored Cross Border, armored cars. You kind of get the gist of it, but from the Rosenman stuff, you get more of the story. So what I was able to do through the dope sheets, through the archive cards, through the photo captions, and then even the after action reports, you can put all those together and you can really tell the story of what happened on a given day in that film. And if you're lucky, which we'll see in a couple of these slides, you can identify soldiers, which is fantastic.
And it's just interesting you said that, Darren, because we had Dia Gupta on Friday, and she was talking about India in the Second World War, and she used photos, and she's of the school of thought that photos tend to just get used in books in many cases, just as a vague illustration, like they get used in documentaries. We're talking about Sherman. Here's a picture of Sherman. Is it the same campaign? Is it the same unit? Who cares?
Right.
But you're making a case, and she made the case that historians should be using photos as just as valid as a resource as war diaries and morning reports and things like that, because as you say there, with the dope sheets there and things like that, you've got incredible information. And then you add in the information you can get from, as we said earlier, bridges and buildings and road signs and things like that. It's as an important tool about establishing how combat unfolded as the reports themselves. But I think they often get seen as purely illustrative as opposed to being part of the process.
Absolutely. And I mean, unfortunately, I even to this day, I'll pick up a book at Barnes and Noble, or I'll get a new book and I'll be going through it, and the book is supposed to be about a certain unit, and there'll be a picture of a tank, and I'm like, that's not even the right tank. It's not even the right country. That tank was in Holland versus versus France or Belgium. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. And then, the thing I kind of skipped on the captions, these captions, these were written in the field, that these photo teams were taking multiple rolls of film a day. Sometimes it took several days for them to, get it developed and then to write the captions. So they're trying to remember, they're looking at their buddy like, hey, what was that town you just were in? I thought it was this town. No, because especially the army guys, the armored units, they were moving so fast. They might have started taking pictures in one town. They ended up 10 miles away in another town, and they use that as the location. And as you mentioned with Google Earth, there's tons of awesome, researchers in Europe, I've been able to work with. I've said, oh, I think it's in this town. And as soon as they look at it, they're like, no, I know that church. I go to that church. It's actually this town over here. And we've been able to, try to be as accurate as possible. And still to this day, I'll see photos that, either misidentify towns, misspell towns. I was just in the Ardennes in May, and I was with Eddie Montfort, who knows the Third Armored area in the Ardennes very well. And I started pulling my pictures out, and just right away, he would point, there's the church, here's over here. I mean, they know where all these spots are. So you really have to do a lot of, between all this information, you have to do a lot of, connecting the dots to get it accurate. So that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
We had a quick question come in from Stephen about the format of photos being taken, 35 millimeters or 4x5. I mean, you've talked about these individuals within the 65th, but are they all using the same gear and the same film?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll be the first one to admit I've not become an expert on the equipment that they use and the cameras. I know there's some actually good reenactment units, some guys on Facebook that know much better than I do in terms of what kind of cameras and equipment they were using. I think that the standard camera was like a Graflex speed camera, so all the prints at archives are 4x5s. Right. But the ones I got from Lieutenant Noble, his family, they came to me in a 35 millimeter roll. So I think, they took those negatives and they blew them up. But so I've seen both. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. So that kind of goes over the dope sheets and the cards. And then this is just another example of a dope sheet. I'm not sure how everyone can read it on the screen, but this is a good example of how Rosamund, on the one on the left, it was late, I think it was early December in Germany before the unit was switched back to the Ardennes. And at the bottom paragraph, he talks about how the cameramen were approached by some of the guys of the 36th Armored Infantry, the Blitzkos, and how they were curious if the real photos got back home in terms of like wounded soldiers, KIA photos, because they were hearing in letters and news about work strikes back home, and they got the impression that people back home, if they really knew how bad it was, they wouldn't be doing the strikes, and they would have a little more support for the war. So he put that note in there, which I thought was interesting. And then the note on the right was one of his first films he did in July of '44, where he talks about he needs longer lenses because he wants to get closer to the tank battles. The lens he had weren't accurate enough, so he was asking for better equipment so he could get better film to record, which is phenomenal. And then I thought these were great because these just shows a variety of how he labeled his film. So before every film, and a lot of folks that watch the archive films online, you'll see this before a film starts. It has the basics, and usually it's kind of in the middle, the bottom middle. It's like a slate, like a chalkboard slate. It has the the detachment name, the date, the subject, and the location. But as you can see here, you had to make do with what you could do. So the upper left, you have a doorway where he wrote what the caption was going to be on the doorway. In the middle there, you got I believe that's the hood of a Jeep. On the right, you got a fence rail. Bottom left, another chalkboard, and then on the very far right, you have it seems to be some sort of canister or casing of something where he wrote what it was going to be with his chalk. So I thought that was kind of interesting how you can see what they had to make do with wherever they were. All right, so let's get into some of the photos. And like I said, I just picked some ones that I've always enjoyed kind of linking together and putting stories together. It kind of tells the story of the division from July. And I go to end of December when the detachment broke up. And then if we have time, I have a little treat on the Cologne battle, which I can throw in there. And the one thing I'll say too, before I start some of these names, my pronunciation of French towns is something to be urine for. It's not because I'm not trying to learn. I'm very bad with foreign languages. You can ask my Spanish teacher from.
As someone who lives in Normandy, half the locals will disagree about the place name. But don't get too bogged down in.
Very good. So what I'll do is I'll just you can see the town names on the bottom there. But this is when the 3rd Armored first entered in. Well, at least the 33rd Armored. The 32nd Armored had been involved in late June, in some actually pretty fierce battles, June 29th and June 30th. And then the 33rd entered in here across the Bière River to Saint Ramon, and see the tank of the tank approaching, crossing the bridge in the corner in the background there. There's a lot of photos of 743rd tanks coming across that bridge as well. And this was one of their first engagements, and a lot of people probably know these photos of knocked out Panzer IVs from the 2nd SS Panzer Division in front of the church. What's interesting on the tank D32 right there, I know his registration number is blocked off, but in another photo of the same series, you can see the registration number. That tank was knocked out in September 10th, as they were approaching the west wall. But what I like about this one though is the next photo right there, in the corner of the Panzer IV in the ditch. The caption says that this tank was knocked out, but based on some research I did and finding a grandson of a veteran of the 2nd SS who has some of their diaries, this tank was nighttime. This tank drove into a ditch, which makes sense, right? It's in a ditch. It wasn't knocked out, drove into the ditch, and they abandoned. So it just shows how, over the years, everyone thinks this tank was knocked out. The unit probably marked it up on tanks that he knocked out, but in fact it was driven into the ditch in the dark and then abandoned. But what's really good about this tank is from the next photos that Roseman took, and these are the next photos are actually stills from the motion picture film of the salvage yard a couple of days later. And you can see a self-propelled gun in the corner, another Panzer IV in the bottom, and then you can see Panzer 631 right there in the salvage yard, and that is the same one as right there in the previous photo. So the photo was taken July 8th, 9th. A couple of days later, Roseman sees it again at the salvage yard, which is just great because as the German armor guys know, being able to see numbers on a German tank is great. You can pinpoint the company, the platoon, etc., even the crew if those diaries exist.
And it's just, if you just go back to that one showing the Panzer in the ditch, because Roderick just said in the sidebar, is that an anti-tank ditch? And no, I mean, I'm a Normandy resident. That's the kind of depth ditches you get on the side of these roads. Before you even get to the earth bank, you've gone down 2, 3, or 4 foot into a ditch. Then you go up the earth bank that can be 6 to 8 foot. Then you get the hedgerow on top. So that's perfectly normal. And there's certain roads. Me and Mag were out a couple of years ago, and we were going down one of those roads with a massive great ditch on one side, and a fucking great truck delivering timber was going, and it got into this point where I had to kind of was backing out of the way, and I don't know how many. Well, I had 1 inch left of my left tires on the actual road, and the rest was hanging over it. It was a bit of a hairy moment, but those are absolutely standard Normandy ditches, folks. There's nothing unusual about that whatsoever, and cars go off them to this day. You'll go around sometimes I've driven my van off into a ditch and got stuck. It's surprisingly common. So that's that. Just for a bit of Normandy insight there. That's nothing unusual at all.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. 'Cause I've done the Google Earth view of this location from that church, and it's still just a sharp corner right around that church, and it looks, other than it's a little more overgrown, but yeah, it looks just as treacherous today as it does back then.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I've always enjoyed how those two films and photos tied in together. You kind of see like this timeline of this German tank that was quote unquote knocked out, and then how it ended up in the salvage yard. These next series of photos, I had to be careful here because some of these were pretty grotesque, as you can tell by the title. But these were from Lieutenant Noble, who was the commander of the unit. So he didn't take as many photos. Official photos, you'll see his name occasionally on the caption cards. But being the commander, he always had a camera with him, so he took a lot of his private ones. So the interesting for this one is the dope sheet for this one that Rosamund took, because he took film for it, but I've never been able to find it, probably because it's so gruesome. But as you can see in the tank in the left corner, it's a Panther, and it has the name Ingrid on the top, which was common for Panzer Lehr at this time. And there's some other famous photos of these Panther tanks with other names. I believe there was an Ursula or Ursa, and there's another one. Very common, but this one, the dope sheet, was about a page long, and he talks about how they got these 3 German paratroopers to collect German dead from the tanks. And the reason was, it wasn't for punishment, it was because they were worried about tanks being booby trapped. That's what the dope sheet said. So they wanted the German, and he said, one of the German, one of the young paratroopers, you can see they're pretty young, all of them were pretty defiant, they didn't want to do it. And he said it took some prodding from the MPs, and they quickly changed their minds. But you can see, they're on top of the tank there, and then one of the GIs from the Graves registration unit is kind of directing them how to get the charred body out of the tank. But these were great photos because, again, to show another named tank, to go along with those other Panzer Lehr tanks that had names, helps a lot of studies there. And then, the fact that, again, a dope sheet that Rosen put together, but never saw the light of the archives. But because of Noble taking his personal negatives, we had the photos. And this was about July 12th or 14th, around the desert. Next photo. This one, this doesn't really show any, historical significance, major. I mean, although Will Hogan loves it, and I know because his dad is in it. But this is CCB command staff of the 33rd Armored when they were in some serious tank battles in July. And there's movie footage of this that exists, but still footage I've never been able to find other than private photos from Lieutenant Noble. So the one on the left is a still from the movie footage. See Colonel Roy's in the middle there. To his immediate left is Colonel Will Hogan, Sam Hogan, Will Hogan's father. And then the next photo is the command staff again. You see the same tank in the background. This tank is pretty cool, has a great name. It's Plenty Tough 2, which means Plenty Tough 1 was probably already knocked out, which is pretty remarkable because they'd only been in action for a couple of days. And what also helps us here too is the fact that tank is named Plenty Tough 2. You can see on the right photo, the Jeep is Pete Jr. Those are P's. So what we've been able to identify is that tanks at the regiment level, the 33rd, began with a P. They were named after P. So Recon always had R, and whatever your company was, if you're I company, your tank name would start with an I. It took us a while to figure out at the regiment level, they started their names with a P, the letter P. So that was a little nugget that we were able to deduce from that. This is probably one of my best series of photos, and I wish I could show them all, but we probably don't have all the time. But before Operation Cobra started, DeMarco stopped by where a bunch of tankers were at rest. He took about 30 photos, and I would say half of them had numbers on there, like official U.S. Army captions. Some of them are at the archives, some are not, and then some of them didn't have anything on at all. But based on the ones he identified names, and then some other clues in here, we were able to identify that this is the entire tank crew of the famous Clarence Smoyer from the Econ of 32nd Armored. So the last two on the right there, those were named. So those were easy because we knew that John Burleson and then Jerry Coleman were in his crew in Normandy. The one second to the left, with the tall-looking fellow, it's hard to see here, but his dog tag is hanging down, and we were able to scan it, the resolution high enough where we were able to zoom in on his dog tag and read his name, and we know that's
Gosh,
yeah,
wow,
that's James Mallet, one of his tankers, and then the gentleman on the left is his tank commander, Sergeant Paul Faircloth, who was killed in September. So it took us several weeks to figure this out, but we were able to find Clarence's entire tank crew there. He was still alive when we figured this out. We sent him the photos, and his eyesight was getting bad as he got older, but he verified it all for us. It was quite the treat. And I remember we asked him, how come you didn't get photographed? Where were you? And he had some funny joke, like he was probably off eating or going to the bathroom or something like that. But these photos are great because it shows the tankers at rest. Different kind of, you get the interesting overalls with the unit patch on the chest there. Just a great view of tanker equipment.
And David said a few 1,000-yard stairs in those pics, and interesting that's just before Cobra. So this is the period where tank warfare in Normandy is still pretty shit. This is the fear of the tiger in every hedgerow. This is the hours taken to move yards, in a sense. Everybody has in every armored regiment, every independent unit knows a story of a tank burning. They've got a story of a buddy who was pulled out. You can see that they don't know that they're days away from, in a sense, not so much the third armored as well, but like 4th and 6th armored are going to hammer down towards Avranches. They don't know yet, but their war is going to change very, very quickly and positively, pretty damn quickly. But there, you can see that fatigue of battling through the blockage.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think Sergeant Faircloth was killed. Mallet, going left to right, Mallet and Burleson both survived. So did Coleman. But in one of the interviews I saw with Clarence on several he did, he talked about his entire crew, and he noted how Jerry Coleman on the right there just had a tough time in the tank, and he was, I think, probably a couple days after this, he was replaced with a new crew member. But to see the entire crew before like you said, that things got really, really hot. It was already pretty bad, but things are going to get even worse for the Third Armored. The Third Armored, along with some other units, the amount of tanks they lost in Normandy, is, atrocious. Okay. This one I thought was interesting because it kind of, as I mentioned with, one thing I did not mention, actually, by covering an armored division, we see the entire breadth of the division. So they weren't always at the front lines, and the division always was in combat. So the photographers had to keep busy and find things to do. So there's a lot of medal ceremonies that were photographed. A lot of engineers building bridges, rear unit stuff. This day before Cobra started, they decided to pay a visit to the Piper Cubs of the Third Armored. So there's movie footage of this that exists, and also a still on the right. I picked this one just because, one, I know everyone knows about the Piper Cubs, but every time I look at it, and just the fact that how fragile that thing is and how that went in the air. It looks like it could fall apart just sitting there on the ground. And there's two grown men in it, but it wasn't much of a robust aircraft to fly around in. And unfortunately, the man in the lower left there, Captain Farrell, he was killed in Belgium when his Piper Cub was shot down doing some air recon for reservists for the artillery units. But this was right before Cobra started, and you can see they're flying over an 8th station there in the upper left. All right, so this next photo, there's a lot to this one. So I mentioned this was used on the cover of the book. I used it in another book I did, Forgotten Archives, about the Sigma Corps photos. And this one, so let me go to the next slide just so you can see I didn't have much to work with. So in the very right you can see there what has the caption. So this is all it said. Infantry rides on the backs of tanks, a theory copied from the Russians in attacks, copied from the Russians in attacks on Normandy. It has the ETO number and has a photographer. Doesn't say the unit. That's, I have nothing to go on. So again, through lots of other things, we know that Murray Root was attached to the 3rd Armored doing photos. And then because of the registration number on the back left, and then it's hard to see on here, but on the very front too of the Sherman, below the assistant driver's hatch, there's a bracket that still no one really knows why that bracket was there. Some people think it was the deflect machine gun bullets. I think a lot of people aren't sold on that. But for whatever reason, 3rd Armored tanks had that bracket, specifically 33rd Armored Regiment. So now we know it's 3rd Armored. And then we find, Steve Zaloga keys me in on the fact that, there's tank loss reports at the National Archives. So upper left, you see this spreadsheet, a modern day spreadsheet that the First Army put together. The type of tank it was, and then how it was knocked out. So we have, and then the tank number is also I2, which is typically, company commander or executive officer of the company. More research, we know that Jess Carter, Lieutenant Jess Carter there on the right, was acting company commander of I Company at the time. And we know that he was killed with his gunner, Corporal Alex Paul. The dog tag there is from what the archives also has. It's called a IDPF, which is an individual deceased personnel file. And it's literally a file for every soldier that was killed in the war. Some are 10 pages, some are 200 pages. Some have things like this at the dog tag. They also have interesting things in there about if remains were pulled from a tank, it might have the tank number, it might have the tank name. So through a lot of different, several months of doing research on, the photo, the KI, who was KIA, the IDPF reports, the tank loss report, we were able to, accurately identify that the guys in that tank, I2, is Lieutenant Jess Carter, the company commander, and his gunner, who you can't see, were killed that day during the when the German counterattack of near Mortain. I Company lost like 5 tanks that day, including the company commander's after action report confirms that. So just a great. I mean, I know it's just one photo, but to me, this was several months of work, and it just tells a lot of like how you can take one photo and you can see, I know who that man is, and then, as I mentioned, his family and the gunner's family have reached out, through a Facebook page I have, and I was able to share this photo with them, and it was just, magnificent to be able to share that photo with them. That this was, unfortunately the day before he was killed, but that's him commanding the company tank there. And what's even better is the photo that Murray Root took after this one kind of solidifies it as well. So the next photo here, the full photo is in the lower right there. The tank going up the hill is I2, the one we just saw. The one behind it is I-25, which when you zoom in on that registration number, you can find that number in some death files as well to confirm who was in that tank. And then at the top of the hill, you see a half track there, which is I-1, which would have been the command half track of I Company. So just how 2 photos just put a story together. And to me, this is why I do what I do, to solve issues like this and be able to put everything together. So this was a great one. This one, nothing special in this one. Just I liked it because it clearly shows how the still cameraman DeMarco and the motion picture man Rosenman were literally right next to each other when they were taking their film. The left, you can see the still of a knocked out Panther, Panther 321, and then right next to it, you can see some of the same civilians, and that's taken from the motion picture. So, sometimes these guys were 100 yards apart, maybe one edge of town, the other guy was at the other part of town, but here they were literally right next to each other. And then Rosenman's dope sheets talk about civilians pulling carts with belongings, expecting captured tank. And so I just like that one, how it kind of shows how the team, how integrated they were working together there in August. And again, this one, this tank was from, I think it's 2nd SS as well. And the same German fellow that his father was a tank commander was able to give me information on this tank crew and what happened to them and so forth.
We had a question from Jeff about, he's not a fan of AI, but is anybody using it to clean up some of the battlefield photos? I mean, I know Michael Ackerman with his Omaha research will sometimes use some enhancements via Photoshop and use AI. It's a slippery slope to changing things, isn't it? Or looking for things that aren't there, isn't it? Because AI is imperfect. I mean, that image on the left, for example, is that the kind of thing you would ever use, that kind of tech to try and get extra details?
No, and I know some of my colleagues will use it just to help with more of like portrait photos of like official, of soldiers, just because some were kind of grainy. Maybe to touch those up, and because they want to do a high resolution printing of them. But other than sharpening, like maybe some blurry lines, that's about it. I mean, I think at least myself personally, these photos aren't perfect. They might have some imperfections to them, but I personally just like what they are, and I roll with them. All right, this next one was a series of photos that is actually the title of the photo. The title of the film caption was 65 miles in 7 hours. And it covered several towns. Again, I apologize for my pronunciation, but Carouge, Jaron, Prey-en-Pelle, Saint-Martin-de-Landes, and then here Chavin. And the reason I like this one is because the upper left, you see a tank, and you see the sensor marks there. He crossed out the hedgerow cutters that had been applied. So, the thinking there was, he was probably thinking, we don't want the Germans knowing that we figured a way out, or didn't want that that secret technology to get out. But he asked to censor that out. And that's a good example with with Photoshop. We can take a lot of that off, and I mean, you don't need to take Photoshop to know what's there. You can kind of see the points sticking out. Yeah, he didn't want that photo to get out. This one was a good example. I used in one of my books in terms of the now and then, what it looks like now. And the street looks exactly the same, the street corner. The gentleman from France that found it for me, nailed it down to a perfect location. And then this tank, because of the registration number on the back left, we know that this tank was knocked out in late November when the 32nd was over near Worth, Germany, in late November. You also, can see a good example of vehicles here. You get a nice, half track from the 36 armored, and then a bulldozer tank on the right. Obviously, the crew there, not too concerned about Germans in the area, all sticking out the tank with, no helmets on, except for the one individual, feeling pretty safe, as they went through these towns there in mid-August. This one was another one that, again, to most people, just looks like a captured German half track, but to me, it was a big mystery, because the photo on the right, I liked it for two reasons. One, I like the look that the young French girl is giving the camera. She looks very very serious, but also because DeMarco didn't have a location on it. Obviously, I know it's France. See the Free French Forces. I really couldn't get much from the building. I couldn't identify it. But then through Rosamund's dope sheets, he talks about being in the areas of Soissons and Leon, and he specifically talks about Free French fighters with captured German half tracks. And then I find Rosamund's film there on the left, which is actually from an AP site, but you can see the half track there, half track here, and I was able to put, able to finally find a location for that photo, which I believe there's a trident on the front, so I think that would make it 2nd Panzer Division that it's from. But again, another little clue there that these photos that, when taken properly and scanned, and you can see it, good quality, you can see exactly what unit it was from. These next photos are mostly the top two are still photos that Murray Root took outside of Marley, August 31st, 1944. The bottom two are stills from the same, our movie footage, crop, taken from the screen of the same action. And this one is interesting because they're kind of far away shots, but the photos end with these shots here of this tank crew walking back along that same edge of woods there from their knocked out tank. And Rosamond's dope sheet talks about tank battle over hillside, P-47s, air support, and then it ends with tank crew returns back from tank being knocked out. One tanker, has a head wound, so you can kind of see the tankers again. Talk about that, that 1,000-yard stare and those, that look on the face. What's good about this one, which I really, really like, is that about a year ago or 2 years ago on the Facebook page I have for the 3rd Armored, a gentleman from Minnesota posted, or no, I'm sorry, not on the Facebook page, in the 3rd Armored newsletter, he posted about 10 years ago on the History Channel. I was watching, I saw footage of tankers in Europe, and I saw my dad. I know it's my dad. I don't know how to find it. Does anyone have any ideas? And the way he described it, the tank crew walking back, and the fact that I was 3rd Armored, it immediately clicked in my head. I said, I know this photo. I know this series of photos. So I went to the photos I had, and also the motion picture film, found the dope sheet, looked at the after action report, and his dad was an F Company, 33rd Armored, which would have been 1st Battalion of the 33rd Armored. And right there in the after action report talks about 1st Battalion, 33rd Armored, being in action August 31st in this location. I send him the link to the film and the photos. He's like, "Yep, that's my dad. That's the film. That's what I was talking about. Thank you very much." And he was really touched. I was able to verify that that is his dad. That is 3rd Armored, and that's where he was in action. It all.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. That's his dad there on the left, the tank commander.
Who probably is 23 or something, but looks in that photo like he's 50.
Yeah. And then it was great because he couldn't remember the names of he remembers some of his names of his dad's crew. And then in another 3rd Armored newsletter I saw, I was able to get access to them all. There was a letter, like a section where people would write in updates, and there was no photo. It was just an update from like 1975. It said the gentleman's name is Howard Scoglin, and it said Howard Scoglin had his tank crew buddies over for Sunday barbecue and drinks. Because they would still get together after the war. And I read that and just thought, look at this photo, and just probably so many stories like this photo that they were telling, back and forth, like how many times they lost a tank and got out of it okay. Sometimes obviously they might have lost a crew member, but just that photo, these photos, and that story just really touched me. And then the fact that I was able to hook up his son with it.
And then that photo there is an absolute example of what I was saying earlier about a photo being incredibly important, because it is conveying as much detail about what the fighting was like at that time as an after action report. It's all on his face. It's absolutely all on his face. And if only more authors would try to match up these amazing photos with the stories they're telling, you're adding an extra dimension to stuff, which thankfully you're doing for us today. But yeah, it's I'm disappointed by photos in so many books these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like you read an after action report for this, it would say tank knocked out. Okay, they lost a tank knocked out. But then when you see, like you said, you see the faces, and just the way they're looking at the camera, it's kind of like that ghost stare, and when the tank knocked out meant a lot more than just one line on the after action report. This one here, this is has the units getting closer to as they're getting out of France into Belgium. This one I like because one, it's the tank, you can see with the exhaust system on the back, the deep weight exhaust system. It's a survivor of the first the first tanks that came ashore with the 3rd Armored after D-Day. But again, the Censure tried to knock out. He tried to cross out the tank unit name and also the tank number. But you zoom in on this one, we can see the tank registration number. We can Photoshop that numbers out. We know that's from I Company, another I Company tank for the 33rd Armored, which exists in another still photo that was taken, and I believe this was taken in England, as they're reporting, based on the gentleman, the soldier wearing the life jacket, and then the print on the building in the background. But you can see this tank, you know, is brand new. All the numbers, they're not faded. It still has the company logo with the lightning bolt, with the eagle, and then, you know, another, you know, connection with the tank loss report. This tank was lost in November, when the 33rd Armored lost pretty much all their medium tanks in 2 days, near Hastenrath, Germany. But I thought that was a good one to show, because you can see it, you know, crossing the border. You can also see it, you know, in June in England before it even got to France. This one, you know, I hate to, you know, show a casualty, but this one I thought was a great connection between a photo caption, photo, and then after action report. But as you can see, the photo on the left, it was not to be published. It talks about a German general, General Heinrich, a commander of the German 89th Infantry Division, that they were able to, the captain mentions he was trying to run a roadblock, so he shot the car and he killed them. They took a photo. But then right here on the right, you can see the after action report specifically talks about, you know, roadblock commander, German 89th, failed to halt upon being challenged and was killed. So the interesting part about this is that the after action report documents the event occurring on September 8th, and the photo caption says September 5th. So I'm more apt to go with the after action report with the 8th, and then the caption, you know, the cameramen probably just lost track. I mean, these guys were, you know, when they finally had a chance to write their caption for their photos, they were trying to, you know, remember from memory when these photos were taken. So you probably, especially this time that in September, the division was moving so fast. They were taking towns, you know, so fast, moving 10, 20 miles a day. So he probably just lost track, but I thought that was a great one. This one is as they get to the German border in Röcken, September 12th. This one was covered a lot in the news media because they were the first American unit to hit the German border. And this one is good again because it helps solve the story in terms of who's in that tank, what tank it is. So again, on the left, you can see there the center, you know, has a little black mark over the, you know, the rear of the tank, you know, blocking out those tank unit numbers. Again, zoom in, a little Photoshop, you know, that's definitely from D Company, the 33rd Armored, which jives with Task Force Lovelady being the ones that were the first to cross the border on September 12th. And then through some more research of, you know, Task Force Lovelady, which I'm actually working on a book now of Task Force Lovelady, you know, I find this news article about the first, one of the first soldiers to cross into the German border, Sergeant Harold Spillman, and it talks about how his tank was named Doghouse, so which, you know, coincides with D Company, the 33rd Armored. And then thankfully I had Lieutenant Noble's negatives from England. So this photo here is of the tanks in England before they were shipped over to France. You know, they're doing all the prep to get them over there. And there right in the back, you see D12 Doghouse. So again, I was able to, you know, all right, that tank is Harold Spillman's. He was Doghouse, and it was fantastic to be able to know like exactly whose tank that is, who's in that tank. And then I found some subsequent articles what talks about some of his crew, also given quotes to the paper, so I was able to rebuild his entire crew at the time based on those news articles. And this photo actually here has a good thing. So the tank in front right there, which is D13, the guys were, you know, loading the ammo cans there. That bracket there thing is that thing I mentioned that no one knows for sure what that's for. It was only on the 33rd Armored tanks. And I've talked to a lot of the tank experts, you know, Steve Zaloga, some of the other, you know, the experts, and you know, the consensus is that it was there to deflect bullets down in the trenches from the assistant gunners, the assistant driver's, you know, machine gun, that he could aim the machine gun down and it would bounce, deflect bullets. But then a lot of people are kind of, you know, it really doesn't matter. End of the day, it doesn't matter. I mean, except to like maybe a small group of tank, but tank bolt counters, as you call them. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good example there. Not know what it is, but I love this photo too because it shows the guys, you know, get everything ready before they head over. and also, a tank in pristine condition, named Doghouse, and then their logo there was a cannon shell with wings on it that says "On the Way," which is great because a couple weeks in the Normandy and you didn't see this. One, it just faded away. Two, it got knocked out, or three, they recognized it was a good target for the anti-tank gunners. Right there on the side, so they kind of paint over it or weld over it, get rid of it.
And by this time, September, Darren, have Third Armored gone kind of rogue in any sense in terms of markings or additions to their tanks? Because you see that as the various divisions, American and British, kind of push through. Some, routinely add a particular color marking, or Sixth Armored painted out the white stars on the front. Is there anything that you as a Third Armored guy can say, yeah, by September they'd all started doing this, or they'd all removed that?
No, I'd say the only thing I definitely see as September progressed, one, because they lost so many tanks, they were getting new ones. There was less and less of like the big numbers on the turret, like hey, here we are, we're D12, like less and less than that, and more of just on the bow, of the tank on the front, glacis there, just like 33rd Armored and then a tank were on the rear. A lot of the stuff on the side of the turret went away. The 3rd Armored, around February, March, as they got into Germany, they were one of the big ones that were taking a lot of the steel they were finding from the German factories, and they were doing a lot of like the iron and steel plates on the front. 33rd Armored did a lot of that, but this time was more of just like not kind of really advertising who they were anymore.
Thank you.
Yep. These are some of Murray Root's last photos with Detachment K before he was transferred out. And he was transferred out to the 7th Corps at the corps level at first, and then I believe he went to 4th Infantry for a while. I can't recall. But this is right past the German border there, obviously, with the dragon's teeth. Interesting, like these photos say a combination of 3rd Armored and 9th Infantry, which is kind of weird because they weren't actually attached to each other at the time, but they were right there in the same, like 3rd Armored went to the left, 9th Infantry went to the right. Down these roads, but just some great photos of the dragon's teeth that Murray Root took. And the task force love lady was stopped cold here for several hours that day after they hit Rukin and lost a lot of tanks, but they made it through. But I put these in here because these are Root's last photos. And interesting enough, it's actually kind of like where a lot of the photo coverage of the 3rd Armored front line stops. There's a big gap between like September 12th and early October. And the main reason for that was the unit they were engaged in heavy combat there at the West Wall near Stolberg with the Germans. So I think it was probably very unsafe for the cameramen to be up near the front. But there's a big gap of movie footage and camera footage of the unit from about September 12th until early October when they were pulled off the line, which makes sense given the nature of the combat. That being said, October, Rosenman gets back at it. They're in the rear. The 3rd Armored is pulled off the line. And the engineers are trying to learn some new techniques on how to get rid of the dragon's teeth. So they did a combination of blowing a path through the dragon's teeth and then plowing dirt over it, making like a little road over it. They tried to blow up each individual obstacle, which was time consuming. You can see here his caption, for his not his dope sheet, but for his slate, he used, chalk on the dragon's teeth, on a dragon's tooth, if you will, which I thought was pretty cool how he just wrote it on there. And then what I like about this series of film that he took, but as he's filming from the tree up there, you can see him in the tree, his buddy DeMarco tried to take a photo of him. So Leon's up there in the tree taking a photo of the engineers, covering up the unit, and Joe, looks up to the sky and says, "Ah, there's my buddy. I'll take a photo of him, doing his job." So a nice little series of photos there showing the engineers with the dragon's teeth. And then really the 3rd Armored at this time was kind of quiet. October, off the line. They'd come off the line for a week, go back in for a couple of days, manning some houses and some recompositions around Stolberg area until about late November when there was an attempt. The 3rd Armored, 104th Infantry, and then even the 1st to try to push further through towards the Rhine, but around Worth and Hassenrath, the 33rd Armored was in action. Not a lot of photos of them in action were filmed, but more of the photos and film are of the supporting units. So this is the the 32nd Armored using their tanks as artillery. A lot of these photos are famous. They've been published quite a bit, either in Life magazine or online, but these are all 32nd Armored tanks being used as artillery support as the 33rd Armored was trying to get through Worth and Aftermath, which they were not able to. 1st Battalion lost most of their tanks over the course of 3 days. Their commander, Lieutenant Mills, was killed, unfortunately. It's a real bad engagement there against the Germans. And then December, this would have been Task Force Hogan and then 36th Armored Infantry near Langevay and Obergeik. And the reason I put these two photos in here is because, with the dope sheet there, you can see, again, how the dope sheet clearly tells you what happened, and the photos talk about what happened. So this was December 10th. The first canister, what Can 1 means canister, talks about a tank mine exploder, T1E1, that had been knocked out by anti-tank gun. You can see it right there, knocked out. This mine exploder was actually with the 738th Tank Battalion, a Special Tank Battalion, which is attached to the 3rd Armored at the time. And then canister 2, he talks about a different model, the T1E3, which had been lost in a ditch. And there it is. DeMarco took it right there in the ditch, that photo. Which I like these because the captions of the photos, the after action reports, and again the dope sheet tie everything together. You can really see what happened there with these specialized mine exploders. And I think the Task Force Hogan lost most of their tanks to mines during this action, which makes sense why they had the mine exploders out there in full force.
Yeah. And a good reminder, Darren, of the variety of roles that an armored division will be taking on. The kind of just artillery, clearing mines. I think everyone has an image from the movies of tank on tank action every day of the week in ETO or anywhere in the world. And tank on tank action is actually surprisingly rare, isn't it? Really, it's far more infantry support, as you said. Their artillery support. Let the tank destroyers do the knocking out of tanks, and these guys have got to do a bit of everything by this point in the war.
Absolutely, and I kind of gleaned that, passed over on that one tank loss report, but that tank loss report shows how it was knocked out, and more times than not, it's artillery, mines, or anti-tank gun. Very rarely do you see tank on there. And even when I'm doing a lot of the research on these soldiers, look at their wound reports and their IDPFs. More times than not, tank was knocked out, track was knocked out. They bailed out, and then mortars or artillery got the guys. There was tank casualties. There was trouble guys. They had to pull out these tanks. They had to pull bodies out, burn bodies. But especially a lot of the wounds were when the crew bailed out and then got hit by mortars or artillery.
Okay. We had another question from Rasmus. No pictures of M5A1s. Is that a choice of Darren's or lack of those pictures in the archives? Because the Stuarts were kind of in a reconnaissance role, weren't they? But is it a choice or lack of photos? Or
I would say definitely not a choice. I mean, I don't favor the M4s over the M5s, and there are some of the M5s, but I think in terms of like some of the really interesting photos that tell the stories. I think it's exactly what you're saying, that the fact that they were used in the recon role, or they were there was always one company or one platoon of light tanks that would guard CCB or CCA headquarters. There's a couple I have of them knocked out, but for the most part, I think the majority of the footage is M4s, just because the M5s weren't out there as much.
Okay.
In terms
of
the front lines.
And we're all loving it, by the way. Just fantastic stuff.
Great. And then these are just two more photos from the same action there around Obergeik and Langevay. Again, you can see a tank knocked out there by mines, which they talked about in the report. And then the photo on the right I included just because, it's a great photo. Of a attempted camouflage of a German SP, but also the gentleman closest of the tankers looking at it, the one without the helmet on. His name was Wallace. I'm going to say Skyharsky or Sikorsky, something. He was a member of G Company of Task Force Hogan, and he was one of the 400 that were part of the lost 400 there in Belgium during the Ardennes, and he unfortunately passed away. But there was a fantastic group that's doing documentary and a movie about the Hogan's 400, and they've been able to get in touch with his family as well because we identified him in this photo and connected him with Task Force Hogan. So that's why I included that one. Next photos. Oh, there we go. Here's the M5s for our M5 guy. This one I put in there just because this was the last series of photos and film that Rosamond and DeMarco took when the entire detachment before they went to the Ardennes. It was taken on December 18th, which, as we know, things had already got started over there, but the 3rd Armored had not headed over there yet. They headed over early the 19th to get over there to Belgium. But this is in Gressenich, Germany. The photo caption, again, was day in the life. It talks about soldiers, scrounging for food. You can see the soldier in the middle has a bunch of, I believe those are chickens. He has ready to cook, and then they talk about being strafed by the German Air Force all day, which because the Ardennes, the Battle of Bulge had started, the German Air Force was actually making some appearances. So these two are M5 tanks of C Company of the 33rd Armored, which would have been Task Force Hogan, being used in an anti-aircraft role before, just hours before they get the order to head towards Belgium. So that's why I included that one. I always thought it was pretty good. And I like the one on the right. You can still see the tank's name. It's Cake, which is C Company, so that makes it it jives. And then on the turret, you can see for those of us from the States, you can see the outline of which I'm pretty sure it's New York. It looks like the state of New York. So let's have some New Yorkers in that tank. And then we start get to the Battle of the Bulge in Ardennes. So Lieutenant Noble and his team were in the thick of it there, outside of Monhay and Houghton, I believe it's pronounced, where they took pictures of the defense prep and then some of the battles around there. And these are all, interesting enough, these were all taken as, these were movie photos that became stills at the National Archives. So they took actual movie footage and made stills out of them. And Lieutenant Noble took all of these, but it shows, German SS there from the 2nd SS soldier, taken in the early days of the fighting. Lone bazooka men, as Rosamond called them in the dope sheet. He calls a lone bazooka man guards the highway against the German aggressors. Again, stage photo, but looks great nonetheless. And then of course, the tanks on the right there with some straw camouflage, waiting for the onslaught of the Germans. And then they took some photos around Houghton, and these were taken right before Christmas. These tanks, Panzer IV and a Panther from the German 116th Panzer Division. Very well-known photo. This one's been printed a lot, published a lot. What's interesting about this one, though, is these are the still photos of the troops, checking out the captured and knocked out tanks. And then a couple of days later, they made movie footage of this area. They tried to make it a little more dramatic about the fierce battle there, and they purposely set fire to the tank. So as you can see, this was taken several. Here's the original photo, and then a couple of days later, they moved the turret around. I think they threw by some smoke grenades down there to make it look like it was burning, but a little dramatic effect for the tank. Just an example of how they had to spice things up a little bit to make it a little more dramatic. And then collection of photos that a lot of people know. These are soldiers from Task Force Hogan's 400, the lost unit that was, I shouldn't say lost, we found that they were temporarily behind enemy lines for several nights and days, grueling conditions. I know Will Hogan's been on it before. He probably touched on this, but really amazing story of soldiers from the 83rd Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, 54th Armored Battalion, and of course some of the tank platoons from the 33rd Armored 3rd Battalion. But these are just photos of the soldiers as they got back to the village of Soy there around Christmas Day. And these are really interesting. These are DeMarco's last photos that he took before he left the unit. So he took some great ones of the guys. Again, talk about the tired faces, but also elated, tired. If they're not laying down sleeping, they're smoking or they're eating. They had been behind enemy lines for several nights. And, to get back to friendly lines was quite the accomplishment. he did a great job taking these photos. The good thing about these is Rosen was there taking film as well. And the film he took, you can see, obviously a little grainier, but you can see the soldier on the left, with the blacked out faces. Then on the right there, in that photo, the larger photo on the left is Lieutenant Hogan, Sam Hogan, with his blacked out face and the hood and his overcoat, talking to a little bit cleaner General Maurice Rose. And when I showed this footage, the movie footage, to Will Hogan and his family, they indicated that they were going to hire a professional lip reader so they could find out exactly what the conversation between the two guys was. I don't know if they ever did that, but I'd be interested to see what the conversation was, because as soon as they saw that, they thought that, we could hire a lip reader. Lip reader can tell us exactly what they were saying. Yeah, great series of photos there.
Wouldn't that be amazing to find out? And I'm noticing as well the change in the uniforms, that the summer, the HBT coveralls and T-shirts and of the summer in Normandy have rapidly been replaced by the full-on winter combat tankers jackets and hoods up and gloves and knit caps everywhere. It's the dust and the dust and sweat of Normandy for the worst winter, arguably the 20th century. A few months later.
Exactly, and then in all the reports you read, and all the first-hand accounts, they say they were told to lose all their things that making noises, their helmets, and in all those photos you look at them, except for one soldier who's probably not part of it. You don't see one helmet. Everyone's wearing a knit cap or nothing at all. There's no helmets in those photos. There's several more of these photos. There's my favorite one. It's a case of a box of Lucky Strikes. And the guys are diving into it like it's gold. I mean, they're just there's like a massive crowd around the case of Lucky Strikes, all trying to get their smokes. And that's one of my favorite photos of that series. And then since we have some time, so as I mentioned, Detachment K was disbanded with all the other detachments in early January, but the 165th, obviously continued to exist as a coverage, photo coverage unit for the units. And Noble and Rosamond continued with the 3rd Armored, along with other names, Jim Bates, Wilson Allen, James Himes, a lot of other guys that might not necessarily have been exactly the 3rd Armored. They might have been, say, in March when the 104th Infantry was attached to the 3rd Armored. So by default, they were with the 104th, so they got some 3rd Armored coverage. The 8th Infantry Division was with the 3rd Armored for a couple of days in late February. So there was a lot of crossover there. But this photo here is, obviously the famous Panther tank at Cologne. This one isn't the most famous one, but this is the one taken. So you had several guys taking photos and film at the same time, but the most famous stuff is from Jim Bates, who was taking this one. But this one here shows one of the crew members hopping out of the Panther before it gets its fatal blow. This photo I just found at a separate archives, not the National Archives, but it shows the tank after it's been hit once, German bailing out, and then the next two are the ones that we know. These are the same photos. It's the exact same photo. The one on the left, you can see the one on the right is the original one. It has the signal corps number, but you can see where he was. There was something, a window or something that was blocking him, and then the one that the archives blew up. They zoomed in on the the building tank to get rid of that blurry position there, but it's the same tank. So that's the one we know. That's the famous one of the the Panther on fire exploding. The one before it was taken right before it and has the soldier hopping out of it. What's great about these photos is in the collection that Rosamond donated to the New York State Museum, in addition to his dope sheets, he has a lot of letters that he donated that he wrote between him and Bates. And even after the war, there's letters from 1980, 1990, while they were still alive. They were writing to each other, talking about this day. Like, you did a great job. You filmed it. The other photos were great. Like you could tell, like this was like a great moment for them. They knew how famous it was. By this time, it had been on several documentaries, History Channel, and so they knew that.
It was the perfect synchronicity of an amazing armored action being captured in real time by an amazing team of videographers, you would call them these days, and that perfect synchronicity of all that happening at the same time, because so many amazing combat actions, no one's there to record it, but that particular one, it's all there. Hence why the Makos's book and all the Dan Hill's done a fantastic video on it on YouTube, and Yeah, credit to the killers, and credit to the people who took the photos of the killers.
Yeah, and in fact, in Rosamund's notes on that dope sheet, he says, and again, they call them, the cans, in cans 4 and 5 are footage to tie in with some shots by T5 Bates, actual duel between a German Mark V tank and one of our new M26 tanks. These shots and canisters 4 and 5 were taken from behind our tank, firing in long shots about 50 yards away from the German tank exploding. The shots by Bates were taken with a 10-inch lens and give full screen pictures of the actual hit and explosion. And so, you can tell, he was very descriptive in his dope sheets back to headquarters, because he would take this film and he would type it up, and then it would get sent by air back to London for processing. And then I like these two here in Cologne, just because after the duel, you have Smoyers Pershing, going down the street after knocking out the Panther. And then on the right, you can see them inspecting the Panther, and right there, the guy in front, there's our Lieutenant Noble of Detachment K, there with some other soldiers checking out the hit on the Panther. So, that's the last photo I have. It kind of brings things full circle with Detachment K. How they started in late June, early July, marching their way across Normandy, and again, they had a couple more months to go. But in terms of having Lieutenant Noble here with the tank crew, I thought that was a great way to end it up. As he's looking back, he's probably looking at Rosamund or Bates, as he's taking this photo. But those are the photos I wanted to highlight. That's all. That's really the presentation there, Paul.
Well, brilliant stuff, Darren. And just kind of my last question, because it's going to be something that we're talking about. We briefly touched on AI and things like that, and colorization. I had a bit of a rant about colorization of photos, because only very rarely is it done exceptionally well, and often it's just people speculating and they get colors wrong. And I guess you're a purist in those senses. Just work with what you've got, and that's it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. I work in IT, so I appreciate technology and I know what it can do for us. But when it comes to this, I feel like it's I personally is it's hands off. That's my viewpoint. One of the cameramen families I got a hold of was I mentioned Wilson B. Allen. He was with the 165th as well. He did some 3rd Armored. He was with 104th, and his son has his photos. And like the last maybe week of his photos that he had of his personal collection were in color. Of some Jeeps and armor, marching through the woods with GIs on it. And it's just when you see real color photo from that time to a colorization now, it's not even, and not taking away from some of these people that are very skilled in what they're doing, but there's just no comparison. It's hard. Yeah. The real color photos from those days, and the archives has some color photos as well, and you see those color photos, and it's night and day. It really is.
Well, Jeff says he's going to be adding your book to his 3rd Armored collection. I think the last thing I think I'm going to talk about with you is I feel that authors will need to start moving into not just releasing a book, but releasing a media project, because if they have ended up getting these high resolution photos, even if you put them on a double page spread in a book, you're still missing out detail. So you could have the accompanying website where you say, okay, here is the 6 megabyte or whatever it would be, or TIFF image, if you want to look at that image at higher detail, if you want to look at these maps or these combat reports, because we've gone, as I said at the beginning of this, we've gone from the grainy photos in books to now books not unable to reproduce the quality of imagery we have available to us. And it's strange how it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. It really isn't. I know various archives across the country, across the world, and then have gotten more open to putting high-res photos and other things online. But as I mentioned, the National Archives here now, all the cards are digitized. So for those researchers out there, or people just wanting to see if there's photos of their relatives' unit, all those cards were digitized in OCR format. So you can search on them. It'll tell you exactly what photo it is. And I know they had plans to digitize all those photos eventually. But in the meantime, if people, I have quite a collection of scans. If people ever need anything, feel free to reach out. I can see if I can help you. I love solving mysteries in terms of is that the right unit and location? Is that the right town? I grew up with the mass market books of looking through it, and any photo with snow was automatically assumed to be the Ardennes.
Yeah.
But there was snow down in Operation Nordwind down in the Lorraine area, and then of course Italy had snow in the mountains. So snow does not equal Ardennes. So I just love to.
And I'm glad you've mentioned as well the fact that we all as historians need to collaborate. You can do the forensic work on the photo, but you need your mates in Belgium or Germany to go out there and check it's the same bridge, and you need the people to do that kind of verification of things. And that's the amazing thing about, since when I started doing this, is I can just, as you can, drop an email to Steve Zaloga and say, do you think this sounds right to you? Or ask Jal Belkovsky, has he got an extra bit of information on that? And that's, we're fortunate that most historians are sharers. There are a couple of people I've met in my career who aren't, but the great majority of people are sharers and realize that all of us are only possibly have a bit of expertise in one area and have to rely on other people to expand, because none of us can know it all. Absolutely.
I think that's a great point. And I think most people I've met are more than willing to share and help out. And I am as well. People can reach out to me and contact me, and because it's these aren't my photos. These are the public photos, as the archive says, they're the public domain. So And Yuri Becker's 9th Division just said, I got the book right after it came out and love it. Always great to see anything on the 3rd Armored Division. They supported the 9th ID many times. Darren is a great guy as well. Great show. Thank you. I think that's typical of the comments we're getting in. Excellent research. So Darren, well, you're welcome to come back whenever you want. It's personal stories, tank photos, forensic detail. What's not to like, folks? So great stuff. Sounds good. We'll do it.
Brilliant. We've got another show tomorrow. We're looking at ordnance work in the USA tomorrow. Ordnance work. So a fantastic story about how the US government basically displaced people to put a big TNT factory in and all the repercussions of that. Looking forward to that. And then on Friday, another forensic show. Chuck Herrick is coming on. Remember, he took apart the myth of the Robert Capa photos on D-Day, and he is now looking at the bombing of Omaha Beach on D-Day and how they missed it and how it all went wrong. And he's basically going to bring that all to a conclusion for us. So looking forward to those. Click, like, and subscribe. Buy my guest books. But folks, thank you, Darren. Thank you, viewers. I will see you all again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Bye.